Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 5th of June of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course, the most interesting and the most important updates are coming from Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the territory between Novopol, Velika Novoselka, Novodonetska, Kremenchuk, Staromlinka. All these settlements is a part of Vremivka tactical bridgehead, where the Ukrainians yesterday on the 4th of June launched their first phase of greatest counter-offensive operation. And as a result of the previous day, they managed to achieve some success, and the sources were saying that Ukrainians were able to get such settlements like Priyutine, the small settlement that located on the south from Novodarivka. Furthermore, the sources were saying that Ukrainians managed to capture Niskuchine as a result of one of those attacks, and so on. But the Minister of Defense of Russian Federation reported today that as a result of small counter-offensive operation that the Russians made during the previous night after the Ukrainians' counter-offensive operation, the Russians managed to restore the control over Novodarivka, and they pushed the Ukrainian position, the Ukrainian forces back to Novopol. Furthermore, the Russians restored the control over Niskuchine, and they pushed the Ukrainians back from that bridgehead as well. And the Minister of Defense reported that as a result of those fightings, as a result of the first wave of Ukrainian greatest counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians lost around 300 soldiers, 56 armored vehicles, including 16 tanks. The sources were saying that Ukrainians still haven't lost any of the Western tanks like Leopard or Challenger. This morning the Ukrainians continued their counter-offensive operation, and today we got more details about the forces, about the structures, about the directions, and so on. And yesterday we discussed that there were a lot of strategically reserved forces were involved in that operation, and today we got more details, more updates, and currently the Ukrainians on this bridgehead use 3 brigades. 31st Brigade, this 31st Brigade, we are moving this brigade in direction of Velika Novoselka, because this brigade is responsible for attack of the Ukrainian forces on the, let's say, Niskuchna, Starozhova, Bogdanova bridgehead. So this is their area of responsibilities. As you can see, very short area, but anyway, this is their area of responsibilities. Another brigade that took part in this counter-offensive operation is 23rd Mechanized Brigade, and the Russians are saying that this brigade is responsible for the area from Novopol to, let's say, Niskuchne. So this is yellow line is their area of responsibilities. And today we got updates about another brigade that was redeployed in this area, and we are talking about 37th Marine Brigade. This 37th Marine Brigade, based on the most of the maps, were located in the vicinity of Odessa. This is newly created brigade with new modern weapon, and today, for example, we got a lot of updates, a lot of photo confirmations, and some, let's say, verbal confirmations, words confirmation that the tanks like Challengers, like Leopards or the France AMC tanks were spotted in the vicinity of Zolotaya Niva on this bridgehead, exactly on the area of responsibilities of that 37th Brigade. So this is the area of responsibility of that brigade. And the Ukrainians made attempts to attack and penetrate the Russians' defense orders along these 3 areas of responsibilities. The Ukrainians were trying to return control over Novodarivka this morning after yesterday successes, but as a result of fierce fightings, the Ukrainians were forced to step back on this area. They were completely defeated, and they couldn't return control over or establish control over Novodarivka. So currently the Russians saved control over this area. Furthermore, the Ukrainians were trying to attack the forces of 31st Brigade, were trying to continue advancing in direction of Niskuchina in this area, and as a result of that attack, those attempts, the 31st Brigade lost around 250 soldiers, 16 tanks, and 24 armored vehicles, including Bradleys. So Bradley is the type of Western weapon of the United States, as I remember, or or the Germans won. So they were defeated and were forced to step back, and currently the Russians saved control over Niskuchina. Another attempt the 23rd Brigade took to made in direction of the hill that located on the west of Starozhovo, this one. So the Ukrainians, and currently there are still fierce fightings in this direction. This is the hill in this area, and this is strategical tactical position, and the Ukrainians are trying to capture this bridgehead, this area, and if they can do this, of course they will be able to establish visible control over every single settlement in the vicinity of this hill. So currently the Ukrainians are trying to push in this direction. By 8 p.m. of the local time, we haven't received any updates about any success of the Ukrainian forces on that direction. And now we are going to one more thing that we need to add to this map is river for better understanding of the situation. So from Velika Novosilovka to the south there goes a river. Let's add the arrow to Staromikhalovka. So this is the river, and as you can see, yesterday the Ukrainians made a lot of attempts to attack the Russian forces on the western bank of that river, and starting this morning the Ukrainians made another attempt, but the main focus the Ukrainians had on the eastern bank of that river. And to tell the truth, and the Russian sources confirm this information, that Ukrainians managed to achieve some success, that they were pretty successful in those attacks. And the first updates we received somewhere by noon time, that Ukrainians, as a result of attack of tanks of 37th Marine Brigade, managed to penetrate the Russians' defense orders and to enter the northern part of Novodonetsk. This very small village, just a few buildings, and that's it. But anyway, that was a very important position of the Russians, and there were very fierce fightings, but as I understand, those fightings took just a few hours, and the Russians reported that as a result of that attack, as a result of the first wave attack, the Ukrainians captured the northern part of that settlement, and later we got reports that the first leopards were spotted in that area without any photo or video confirmation, and somewhere at the 4 or 5 p.m. of the local time we got update that the Russians were defeated in that area and were forced to step back in direction, as I understand, of Kremenchuk. And as a result of that attack, the Ukrainians managed to capture the entire settlement, and currently the Russians are saying that Ukrainians are trying to develop the bridgehead in this area and to make some kind of reorganization, and they will continue probably to advance further to the south or else. And the thing is that yesterday we had the same updates from the Ukrainian side, that they managed to capture settlements like Niskuchne, like Novodarivka. Furthermore, the Ukrainians managed to advance further, and today we're the witnesses of the same situation. Currently the Ukrainians captured that settlement, and before the night comes, the Ukrainians need to create the bridgehead in this area, to create fortifications, trenches, and to hold these positions during the upcoming night counter-offensive operation from the Russian side. And if the Ukrainians are able to hold the settlement by tomorrow's morning, then we can say for 100% sure that Ukrainians will be able to continue holding these positions for more days than more than just one day. Furthermore, the Russians reported that 31st Mechanized Brigade in this area, after this brigade was defeated and after the attacks of that brigades were repelled in the vicinity of Niskuchne, made another attempt, but on the eastern side of this river, and as a result of that attack they managed to advance at least for 1 kilometer in direction of Oktyabrskaya settlement, but on this map this settlement has the title of Blagodatne, so in this direction. And furthermore, the Russian blogger as Ryber reported that Ukrainians currently are trying to create a bridgehead along this river. This is Kashlygach river, and after that, and currently they're trying to develop their defense line and their bridgehead along this line. They're moving a lot of tanks, a lot of armored vehicles in this area. Some sources were saying that Ukrainians were deployed up to 50 armored vehicles on this line, and if they are able to do this, because the sources were saying that the Ukrainians achieved success in Novodonetsk in the vicinity of Blagodatne, but there is another part of the front line along the river, and that Ukrainians were defeated along this river and were forced to step back. But probably understand this might be just a question of time, and sooner or later the Ukrainians will be able, using the Western tanks, to push the Russians back from this bridgehead. And if the Ukrainians are able to do this, of course the next step will be to attack the Russians using the broad front line attack, and they will attack every single settlement along the river. That river they will attack Blagodatne, they will attack Urozhaine, and of course the Ukrainians will continue advancing to the south in direction of Kremenchuk, and of course the Ukrainians will make the most important attack in direction of Stara Mikhailovka, this settlement, using the forces and tanks of 37th Brigade, and probably the Ukrainians will move the reserves of 1st Tank Brigade to the south as soon as they understand and realize that they managed to establish a bridgehead in this area. So we'll see whether the Russians are able to do, because that was just the first day and today was the second day. Of course, we can't judge and we can't make any projections based just on those 2 days. We need to expect, we need to wait more, because the thing that I'm trying to tell you is that all these attacks is very important from the Ukrainian side, from the Russian side, but there are 2 important factors that we need to keep in our mind. The first one is that we still haven't seen Challengers or Leopards on this front line, and the most important, we still haven't seen Challengers on this front line. Why I'm saying about Challenger, don't forget that the United Kingdom supplied and sent Ukrainians the uranium polluted shells, munition. So probably we might see the first usage of this type of weapon exactly on this Vremivka tactical bridgehead. Believe me, the Russians do have equipment to catch the signal and to catch the presence of this type of weapon on this front line. And the most important question I have, what the Russians are planning to do if the Ukrainians start using uranium depleted munition on this front line? What is going to be the answer and response from the Russian side to this action? This is a very important question. All these clashes is not important in comparison if the Ukrainians start using uranium depleted shells against Russian forces. Before this case, before this bridgehead, we were talking about that just like some kind of joke or some kind of topic to discuss with our friends. And today, this is the reality. The Ukrainians launched a counteroffensive, the Ukrainians start using Western weapon, and they do have uranium depleted munition. So we'll see what is going to be next. When talking about Zaporozhye front line, this front line is calm and stable. Yesterday there was few recos in combat in this area, but all of those attempts were repelled by the Russians. Today, I believe, probably at night they will continue doing some kind of reco in force, but for now the front line is stable, and the Russians expect the activation and intensifying of activity from the Ukrainian side within the next few days or even probably hours. Now we are moving to Ogledar. This front line is stable, no changes on the ground. The Ukrainians didn't make any attempts to attack the Russians in this area. When talking about Marinka and Donetsk front line, as we discussed in the previous video, the special units Akhmat with support of 5th Motorized Brigade and 150th Motorized Division managed to capture almost the entire central part of Marinka, and currently the Ukrainians controls just the eastern outskirts, western outskirts and the western part of Marinka, but there are not many buildings left, and I believe that the Russians with this speed, with this tempo, will be able to capture Marinka even probably by the end of the next few weeks, or probably by the end of the next week or something like this, if the Ukrainians are not going to find a solution or are not going to make something new on this front line. Now we are going to Avdiivka, to Donetsk front line. Today we got also a lot of updates from this area. If you remember, yesterday the Ukrainians made at least 2 attempts to attack the Russian position. One of those attempts was from the line Tonenka Sever in direction of Vodyane, and the second attempt was made in direction of Opytne. The Ukrainians in the vicinity of Opytne was got under the artillery fire and were forced to step back, but the forces who were attacking Sporne, who were attacking Vodyane, achieved some success, and today the Russians are saying that they were forced to step back from the trenches and fortifications that were located on that hill, and currently this hill, these forest lines are under complete Ukrainian control, and now from these positions, these positions are located on the hill, they can attack the Russians on this area, and currently the Ukrainians got some initiative in this area. The Russians continue shelling and attacking Ukrainian positions in Firomaiska and Kurakhova. Kurakhova is a railroad station, and probably the Ukrainians were moving some forces from 23rd Mechanized Brigade from Pokrovsk in direction of Kurakhova, and that's why the Russians were attacking this area heavily, and they tried to control this area, not to allow the Ukrainians to be flexible and mobile. Furthermore, the Russians attacked positions of the Ukrainians in Berdichi and Avdiivka itself. And the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of fierce fightings on Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 425 soldiers and 15 armored vehicles. As you can see, very interesting numbers. For example, one more time, on Zaporozhye, South Donetsk, and mainly on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead, the Ukrainians lost 300 soldiers, and when talking about Donetsk front line, the Ukrainians lost 425. We see that probably the clashes on this front line is heavier and there are more actions in this area, but because of the fact that we are all used to this situation, we don't mention and we don't pay attention to these numbers, and the actions in the vicinity of Vremivka tactical bridgehead are very heavy, so that's why we are paying this area more attention. But probably this is even more important area, at least when talking about numbers, about the losses of soldiers. But when talking about armored vehicles, we see that yes, the Ukrainians lost around 56 armored vehicles on the Vremivka tactical bridgehead in comparison with just 15 armored vehicles on Donetsk front line. So of course Vremivka is much more important for the Russians, as I understand. Now we're going to Bakhmut. There were also a lot of updates. The Russians attacked for the third time in a row the positions of MO Depot of 24th Mechanized Brigade, and probably later the forces of that brigade made a small offensive operation in direction of Mayorsk with the usage of 4 tanks and 2 armored vehicles, but the Russians repelled those attacks and the Ukrainians were forced to step back. Very interesting updates are coming currently from Bakhmut, and as you can see, there are a lot of icons in this area. The most important update came today in the morning, and the head of Wagner Prigozhin reported that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to penetrate the Russian defense orders and to enter the Berkhovka, this small settlement on the northwest of Bakhmut. That was the first update, and of course if we take a look at this bridgehead, we see that still there is nothing to worry about and to panic when talking just about this separate case, because as you can see, probably the Ukrainians were able to develop their attack along the water, along the Berkhovskaya lake and the railroad ways, and basically this is just a regular artillery bag. And to tell the truth, I will not jealous anybody who entered this artillery bag, because anything that entered there will stay there for a very long time. So from this perspective, I don't see any risk of that attack from the Ukrainian side. The Russians left their positions, moved in direction towards more reliable. The Ukrainians entered the artillery bag, and I believe that they were completely destroyed. But also today we got another 2 important updates from the south of that bridgehead and from the north. The Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported that as a result of fierce fighting and storming operation, the Ukrainian forces of the 3rd Assault Brigade Azov managed to develop their bridgehead in the vicinity of Klishchiivka from, let's say, 100 meters to 700 meters, and this is a very powerful development on this side of the bridgehead. Another offensive operation the Ukrainians made from the Orekhovo-Vasilievka in direction of Paraskovivka, and the Ministry of Defense reported that as a result of that attack of Ukraine, the Ukrainians managed to develop their bridgehead from 200 meters to 1,600 meters. Of course, it's up to you to believe or not this information. And if you ask me, I wouldn't believe this information, but the report from Prigozhin tells me that probably the Ukrainians made some attempts on those directions and probably they did achieve some success, but we need more time and to get at least some confirmation from the Russian sources. And believe me, if the Ukrainians were able to develop these bridgeheads on the north and from the south, believe me, the Russians would announce and tell us, the Russian sources, the Russian bloggers will give us this piece of information very soon. Now we are moving to entire Seversk Donetsk front line. The Russians report about attacking the Ukrainian positions in Drushkovka. They destroyed another radar from the Ukrainian side that they were using for counter-artillery duels. The Russians attacked Ukrainian positions in Alexandrovka, in Zakitne, in Serebryanka, in Seversk, and Sporne. Furthermore, the Russians reported that another Su-27 was destroyed in the vicinity of Zakitne. And this is very interesting. Probably the Ukrainians were using either Dnipro airfield or, let's say, Mirgorod airfield to attack the Russian positions in this area, and that was like a heavy destroyer, and probably he was trying to attack the Russian Su-34 aircraft that currently are bombing the Ukrainian force in the vicinity of Bilogorovka. And probably on the way back home, the Su-27 was destroyed in the vicinity of Zakitne. So, and this is the second Su-27 during this week, during the previous 7 days that Ukrainians lost during air duels or something like this. Now we're going to Kupiansk-Liman front line, and the Russians reported that the total losses of the Ukrainians on these front lines were around 155 soldiers, 7 armored vehicles, and 7 artillery systems. As you can see, the level of losses is normal, is stable, and the only interesting update is that the Russians, according to the Rybar blogger, managed to cross Oskol River and to capture the settlement Novomlinsk, this one. And currently the Russians do have bridgehead from the south and from the north and from the east of Dvorechna, and they can start encirclement and storming operation of that settlement. And this very important settlement, and using this bridgehead, of course, the Russians later can develop their offensive operation of encirclement operation of Kupiansk, of course, and encirclement operation of Ukrainian forces that are currently located on this bridgehead on the north of that arrow that the Ukrainians are using for bombing and shelling Shebekin and Belgorod region. And furthermore, the Russians reported as a result of borderlands clashes in the vicinity of Novotavlazhanka, the Ukrainians lost 10 soldiers. And the Ukrainians continue making photo and video confirmations that they control the southern part of Novotavlazhanka. So we'll see that the situation in this area develops in a very negative way. And the Russians published video and photo from Shebekin, and currently this is the ghost town. People left the settlement and people returns to the settlement just for one purpose, to get their bags, their things, and then they run away from the settlement. And of course, we understand that this is another catastrophe, another disaster, and the Russians understand that now is summer, but winter is going to come very soon, and of course they need to give people chance possibilities to return back home, but for these purposes they need to create a barrier and to push the Ukrainians as far as possible from the combat line in this area. And that's it for this video. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.